The ocean. It is big, it is blue, and it's not home for us yet, for good reason too. Ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to discuss some of the unsolved ocean mysteries. The ocean is a very large place. It takes up more than 70% of the Earth's surface, and 80% of it is still undiscovered by humans. This means that most of the waters on our planet remain unexplored, uncharted, and unseen by our eyes. And that alone is very troublesome. I mean, think about it, okay? We are very curious creatures. We want to know literally everything. And we have been on this planet for what? 300,000 years or so. And we still haven't fully discovered what's on our planet. We probably know what's on Mars more than we know what's in the ocean. And the ocean's right here, mind you. The ocean is a very deep and treacherous place. I mean, on Earth with Earth monsters, it's way different than ocean monsters because of like gravity and a lot of other things to take into consideration. On land, you are free. You can, let's say, run, you can walk, you can choose to fight or flight. But with the ocean, you are stuck there floating at the mercy of whatever sea creature is wants to have you for dinner, basically. I mean, look at look at some of the results I got for sea monsters. Literal giant squid monsters, snake-like giants, and unbelievably giant beings that our minds can't even comprehend. With enough introduction, welcome to the most baffling ocean mysteries. Number 1, the Mary Celeste. It is the most famous ghost ship we have all come to love. The Mary Celeste was not even originally called the Mary Celeste, it was called the Amazon. And the Amazon got into a wreck, and the wreckage was sold to many businessmen until it landed in the hands of James Winchester. It would be until October 29th, 1872, when the ship would see its first experienced captain, Benjamin Spooner Briggs. Now, get this, Captain Briggs wasn't your everyday captain. He was an experienced seaman, having spent most of his life at sea. He worked his way up to become a master mariner, and he was respected by all those who served under him because of his fairness and ability. Captain Briggs was to take the ship on her first voyage following the extensive refit, and that was to take it to Genoa, Italy. Briggs chose the crew for this voyage with care. He handpicked trained professionals and close friends who had served under him before. So, when the crew was completed, this was no ordinary crew. This was not your everyday crew. The captain who knows everything and the crew that's barely capable. No, this was a crew that was so good. It had Briggs eminently saying that he was very satisfied with the ship and the crew. After stopping at New York, the ship loaded 1,701 barrels of alcohol. He also brought his wife and baby daughter along, so between Briggs, his wife, his daughter, and the crew, there was a total of 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste. On November 5th, the ship would then set sail across the Atlantic to Italy, and that was the last time any of the crew was ever seen again. 8 days later, a ship by the name of the Dei Gratia left from a nearby port following the same general route as the Mary Celeste. On December 4th, the Dei Gratia would spot a ship just floating there. The captain tried to make contact with the ship, but upon coming up to the ship, he noticed that the sails were set to an odd state. Some of them were folded up, and some of them were not, implying that the sails were last left in a transition period, which was alarming. Some of them were folded and some of them were not. He also noticed that there was nobody on the ship. This ship was the Mary Celeste. The captain of the Dei Gratia sent two of his men to inspect the ship. Upon taking a closer look, they found that the sails were in a poor condition, some of them missing altogether, and much of the rigging was damaged, with ropes hanging loosely over the sides. The main hatch cover was secure, but the hatches to the lower part of the ship were wide open, and this is an especially bad thing because for long periods of time, if it were to rain or something, all of the water would just get to the bottom of the ship. They also found that the binacle, which is a simply large device that holds the compass and other measurements together, was pushed over out of its place and its glass cover was broken. And this is especially alarming for a multitude of reasons. One, no one would just hold a 300-pound metal block and set it over for no reason. Two, it's a very large and heavy metal device, and that is about waist height, so moving it would have been really difficult. Along with everything else, they found an abandoned makeshift sounding rod, which, in simple terms, is a device used for measuring water in the hold. It was just found on the deck, as well as about 3.5 feet of water in the hold. A significant but not an alarming amount for a ship that size. Most notably, the ship's single lifeboat was missing, and the rope that you would usually untie was not untied, it was cut, meaning that they were in a hurry to get away from whatever they were facing at the moment, because when you are at sea, you only have a limited amount of rope. So you wouldn't cut a rope, you would untie it to save it for later. Upon further investigation, they found the captain's daily log, and he logged everything by the hour up until 8 a.m. on November 25th. So we can safely assume that whatever happened between 8 and 9 a.m. And looking at the coordinates that the captain logged, that would place it at 400 miles away from its point of discovery. And one of the strangest things about this whole mystery is that everything was packed away neatly. Everyone's personal belongings were just there, and the food rations were left behind. However, the captain's navigational equipment was missing, and there was no obvious signs of violence or fire. The captain of the Dei Gratia decided to take the Mary Celeste to port in order to get the salvage earnings. Under a maritime law, a salvor could expect a substantial share of the combined value of the rescued vessel and the cargo. That means if you were to find a floating boat or some treasure and bring it into port and sell it to a private owner or the government, you could expect a very handsome finder's fee for recovering the wreckage. So the captain of the Dei Gratia saw a floating ship full of potential, life-changing money, and he decided to sell it. But because he was trying to get money for it, there were court hearings to determine whether the ship was gained by moral means or not. The salvage court hearings began in Gibraltar on December 17th, 1872, under Sir James Cochrane, the Chief Justice of Gibraltar, and the hearings were conducted by Frederick Solly Flood, Attorney General of Gibraltar, and Flood isn't exactly the guy you want against you. He was described by a historian of the Mary Celeste as very arrogant, and once he made his mind up about something, he stuck to his belief no matter what. He is the equivalent of a flat earther, basically. He will believe whatever he wants to believe, and he will try to prove it in any way, shape, or form. An investigator who was sent to look at the ship noted cuts on each side of the bow, caused, he thought, by a sharp instrument, and found possible traces of blood on the captain's sword. His report emphasized that the ship did not appear to have been struck by heavy weather, citing a vial of sewing machine oil that was found upright in its place. Because if it were struck by heavy weather, that vial of oil would have just fallen over. It wouldn't have been as steady as it was. So, in conclusion, the ship had not been involved in a collision or run aground. Flood did not believe that the ship was gained by moral means after listening to the testimonials of the crewmen of the Dei Gratia, so he made up every absurd conspiracy to try to prove that human wrongdoing was the cause of Brig and his crew's disappearance rather than a natural disaster. He went as far as to send a report to the Board of Trade, adding his own conclusion that the crew had got at the alcohol and murdered Briggs' family and the ship's officers in a drunken frenzy. So basically, the crew of the Dei Gratia, everyone just got drunk and they killed them, and they hid it so well that everything was so perfectly clean and neatly packed in its place, but with somehow the captain's navigational tools missing. That completely makes sense. Flood thought that the captain of the Dei Gratia and his men were hiding something, specifically that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned in a more easterly location, and that the log had been doctored. He could not accept that the Mary Celeste could have traveled so far while uncrewed. And hey, that's a very fair thought to have. I mean, the ship could not travel that far uncrewed, especially with like the broken sails and some not being set so like carefully, some missing. But human wrongdoing is just going a bit too far, because let's say they were pirates, okay? And I'm going to talk about this later. They would not have left any grain of rice on that ship, let alone everyone's personal belongings. And while that's not a so crazy thought to have, going as far as to do what he does next is crazy. Okay. So James Winchester, the original owner of who hired Briggs, arrived in Gibraltar on January 15th to inquire when the Mary Celeste might be released to deliver her cargo and to get his money back. But Flood had other plans. He demanded a suity of $15,000, money which Winchester did not have. And Flood hung onto his original thought so dearly, to the point that he thought that Winchester had deliberately engaged a crew that would kill Briggs and his officers as part of some conspiracy. You see, most of his work is just conspiracies. He doesn't have any solid ground to stand on. Imagine, you are an owner of a ship and you come to get it back after your crew had disappeared, and you're kind of bummed out about it because the captain you had hired was really good, and this guy just comes and accuses you of conspiring with others to purposefully kill the crew and captain. And I mean, dude doesn't even need explanation. He just wanted the conclusion to be the reality of what happened. He was willing to accuse anyone, even merely involved with the Mary Celeste. Flood's theories of mutiny and murder would receive all significant setbacks, with scientific analysis of the stains found on the sword and elsewhere on the ship showed that they were not blood. The marks on the bow were not man-made but came from a natural action of the sea on the ship's timbers. So that was a complete blow to the face. With nothing concrete to support his suspicions, Flood reluctantly released the Mary Celeste from the court's jurisdiction on February 25th. But that doesn't answer what happened to the Mary Celeste. There are many people who still believe Flood's theories of basically insurance fraud, and that doesn't make sense because both captains were seasoned captains and they were making way more than whatever the expected pay was. And just back to the conspiracy, he did not accuse James Winchester that he killed the crew. He accused the crew and James Winchester of like collaborating to do this insane scam where they would just abandon ship and then someone else would find it, and literally insurance fraud, but not called insurance fraud. But it still doesn't make sense because they were making way more than the expected pay was, and it doesn't make sense for Briggs to take his family with him in order to make a few bucks that he did not even need. Another theory at the time was pirates, but that doesn't make sense for even more reasons. Because if pirates were to attack the ship, okay, think about it. They would want to steal everything from it because they're in it for the money. However, as mentioned before, all personal belongings as well as over 1,000 barrels of alcohol. That would have been striking gold for pirates. But they were left undisturbed and were in their respectful places. I mean, if you were a pirate and you come onto a ship, okay? Let's say got hold of the crew and everything, you would immediately, your mind would be like, steal, you know? And leaving 1,000 barrels of alcohol just isn't what you would do. Also, it wouldn't make sense for pirate to just kidnap people and not hold them for ransom. Some speculations about a natural phenomenon occurring like a water spout, which is like a tornado in the middle of the ocean, could have been caused like by natural occurrences, caused the captain and his crew to leave in a hurry. And while that is a good theory at first, everything wouldn't be so neatly packed in its place if it were the case of a water sprout or similarly suggested a seaquake. Another suggestion holds that a bit more weight, and is that throughout the trip on the captain's log he kept mentioning how he was hearing small explosions coming from the bottom deck, so maybe the one day there was a larger explosion, and that would explain why the bottom cargo hold doors were open upon discovery, because they were trying to air it out. However, in 2005, the Channel 5 broadcasting station recreated this story, and even if there was a very large vapor explosion, it wouldn't destroy any of the interior, and the vapor explosions were quick and didn't have any lasting damage. The problem here is the crew was handpicked by a seasoned captain. Everyone was experienced and probably knew that these vapor explosions can't do them harm. So that got debunked as well. Nobody really knows what happened to this day, and that's probably one of the scariest thing, if not the scariest thing about the ocean. No one knows what happened, and it's completely up to your imagination. Okay, the Flannan Islands are a series of uninhabited islands on the west coast of Scotland, with the largest one being Ellian translating to Big Isle. The Flannan Isles lighthouse was built in 1899 near the highest point on Ellian as a way of signaling to sailors who were coming into port. The lighthouse was at first lit on December 7th, 1899, and 4 keepers were assigned to the lighthouse. So the way it would work, one of the workers would take a break for 2 weeks, while the 3 remaining men stayed at the lighthouse for 2 weeks, and the 3 lighthouse keepers wouldn't see anyone for 2 weeks. This meant that there were 3 people on the island tending to the lighthouse at all times. The first record that something was abnormal on the Flannan Isles was on December 15th, 1900, when a ship by the name of Arctur passed near the Flannan Isles. The captain of the ship noted that he could not see the light, though the conditions should have allowed him to. You see, this is a very bad thing, because lighthouses should be on at all times to alert sailors and basically tell them, hey, there's an island here, hope you don't hit it, you know. The crew tried to go to the island, but there was an extraordinary fog at the time, so it would be until the 26th of December that they would be able to go there. On arrival, the crew and relief keeper found that the flagstaff had no flag, none of the usual provision boxes had been left on the landing stage for restocking, and more ominously, none of the lighthouse keepers were there to welcome them ashore. So the captain of the Hesperus tried to reach the lighthouse keepers by sounding the ship's horn, but there was no response. He tried again by firing a flare, but there was no response. The relief keeper went up the island to find that the entrance gate and the entrance door and the door after that were all closed, but the kitchen door had been left open. All of the beds were unmade and the clocks were stopped. The relief keeper realized something was awfully wrong and returned to the Hesperus ship to get more people to investigate with him. He went back up the lighthouse with the Hesperus's second mate and a seaman. A further search revealed that the lamps had been cleaned and refilled. A set of oilskins was found, suggesting that one of the keepers had left the lighthouse without them, and there was no sign of any keeper, neither inside the lighthouse nor anywhere on the island. So, James Moore, the relief keeper, and the 3 seamen were left to operate the lighthouse as well as investigate what happened to the 3 lighthouse keepers while the Hesperus sailed back to telegraph the Northern Lighthouse Board. On the East Coast, everything was in perfect order. However, this was not the case on the West Coast. The West Stock seems to have been completely destroyed, with some of the ropes just hanging loose, iron railings completely ripped out and some even missing. The iron railway by the path was wrenched out of its concrete, and the rock weighing more than a ton had been displaced. However, this damage was already written down in the keeper's logbook, and he said some things needed repairs and there were several broken things. He did not say anything to the effect of the entire dock being destroyed. There was, however, a day-by-day log of everything that happened, and it was noted that there was an intense fog and very turbulent weather, as well as the time the light was extinguished on the morning on December 15th, as well as the atmospheric readings as late as 9 a.m. In the assistant's log, the assistant spoke about how the storms were getting worse. In fact, they had been so frightening they were causing the men to pray. Despite being on top of a 150-meter cliff in a tall building that's only a year old and having their chances of survival close to 100%, the storms were so frightening and bad that the men still felt unsafe inside of the lighthouse. And the last entry on the logbook read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." There was also a guy who was being paid to just check if the lighthouse is active. So all he had to do was look in the direction of the lighthouse and say, "Hey, the light is on." He could see the light. He had reported that he couldn't see the lighthouse tower between December 17th and December 29th. He could only see the light on the night of December 12th, and then he did not see it at all. This investigation was somewhat useless, if I'm being honest, because the conclusion they got to was, and I quote, "An extra-large sea had rushed up the face of the rock, had gone above over them and coming down with immense force, and had swept them away completely." This is completely flawed for so many reasons. One, the guy who was watching the tower, remember him? He would have seen the extra large sea and would have reported it right away. But given that he hadn't reported the lights being out for a while, it's unlikely that he would report it, but he would still have seen the giant sea and reported that. My speculation is that he couldn't see the light because of the fog, But a fog, no matter how thick it is very highly unlikely to cover a wave that could sweep 3 men off the lighthouse, move a rock weighing a ton, and completely demolishing everything. 2. No bodies were found. They were there, and a couple of weeks later, they were not there. If a giant sea were to sweep them away, it would have swept them away somewhere, maybe on a beach or something. 3. They were inside the lighthouse. If the giant sea were to get to them, it would have to go through the lighthouse first, completely destroying it and then sweeping them away. So, this is just completely flawed, and it really doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. The ocean is a very scary place. Not only do you not know what's out there, which triggers the fear of the unknown for many, but you have no full control over your body and over what happens. I mean, sure, you can swim, but when you are in the grasp of the ocean, you are at its mercy too. You don't know what you could encounter, nor can you imagine it. And even if you could, you can't do anything about it. It is a dark abyss containing a multitude of different and unique creatures of all shapes and sizes. So beware of the ocean and don't swim too far, because you don't know what's out there to get you.